Dogs have dropped a rescue guy on the deck with a spare pump, and we're starting to pump the water out. Hopefully we'll make it to land. I got to tell you, I admire completely the rescue service helicopter pilot. He's had this helicopter hovering above us for half an hour, hardly moving, quite a strong and gusty breeze. Maybe Prince William's not such a bad bloke after all. Before World War II, up to 30% of Lithuania's population was Jewish. After World War II, the total number of Jews thought to have survived in Lithuania was 8,000. Some met their deaths in here, the headquarters of the KGB after World War II and the Gestapo during World War II. Many names are carved on the walls. What was once a great multi-ethnic and multinational country is now 84% ethnically pure, to use a term Slobodan Milosevic searched hard for. Behind these pine trees is hidden a grey facade of a building that very strongly reminds you of the difficulty of some parts of Lithuania's history. This building was KGB headquarters. The windows along the bottom hide cells. I've just been through there and you can't take a camera in, so I'm going to have to try and explain to you in words what it felt like. I have travelled a lot and I've been to many parts of the world and many museums and monuments and markers to atrocities. This one has left me more speechless than any other and has left me with a profound feeling of fear of what it would have been like to be inside there. Carved on the outside are a whole bunch of names of people who died during the resistance in 1945 to 1947. But inside this building was the pre-World War II but post-World War I occupation forces secret police. Then the Nazis were based in here 41 to 44, and then when the Soviets reoccupied Lithuania in the second half of 44, their secret police and ultimately the KGB was in here. When you walk into the cells downstairs, you feel the fear of what it would have been like to actually walk in there the first time. Well, I should correct that. You feel a little bit of what it must have been like. In the execution room, you feel very strongly that at least 1,000 people had died in that tiny concrete room. While Lithuania seems to be doing very well for itself now, with modern cars on the streets, lowering unemployment, rising wages, and it definitely is one of the countries that has done very well from the end of the Soviet Union. And remember, Lithuania was the first of the Baltic states to declare its independence. This place reminds you how tough they had it up until 1991. while we're on Lithuanian history, it's good to look back on it. Lithuania was founded in the early Middle Ages, when wandering tribes came here in search of amber that's still sold in all the souvenir stalls. By about 1006, these tribes had unified enough to be mentioned in texts as Lithuania. After unification of the different tribes, Lithuania expanded to at its highest point, reaching from the Baltic Sea down to the Black Sea, covering territory that's now considered part of Ukraine, part of Belarus, and other Baltic states. It's now shrunk to be a small country up on the Baltic coast only, but Lithuanians will tell you over and over again they used to have one of the largest empires in Europe. In many ways they're a bit like the Mongolians, like that, stretching back to past glories. Here in Trakai, the Grand Duke of Lithuania combined the two tribes of Lithuania back in around about the 1400s from that castle. He also brought to here the Karatite tribes, originally from Baghdad. They are Reformed Jews that believe and read only the Torah, rejecting other later rabbinic scripts. So this actually was a good example of the heart of the multiculturalism that was Lithuania. Here in this castle, the bodyguard included a number of Jews, a number of Muslims, plus Catholics and Orthodox. World War II thoroughly removed that multiculturalism. So when I came here to Lithuania, the last thing I expected to see in a cafe was a Mongolian ger. Now you might think, because I'm slipping and sliding down this hill, I must be in the middle of goddamn nowhere. But the truth is, I'm in the middle of Kiev, in Ukraine. Now I've got to tell you, my first impressions of this place are really good. But then again, I've come here in spring, which has got to be the best time for anyone's city. But I am in this beautiful, huge park, surrounded by wonderful nature and blossoms, and kids laughing and screaming because it is Orthodox Easter. No, right in the heart of Kiev, and my first impressions of this place, beautiful city, lovely people. I'm about to hop on the public transport here in Kiev, and like all former Soviet countries, it's pretty good, and I was a few hundred metres away and saw a train about to pull in. In Australia you'd run to try and catch it because you've got a long wait for the next, but by the time I've walked the few hundred metres to the station, bought my train token, which is the equivalent of about 20 cents, and then walked up the stairs to get to the platform. The next train is just now pulling into the station. Well, we've got a lot to learn. I gotta tell you, Kiev really is a pretty city. Kiev down to Chisinau in Moldova. This is a train station. On a train, just crossing the border right now from Ukraine into Moldova. One of the great things about travelling is language. Trying to sort out what's going on. I'm plodding along in the train here from Ukraine down to Moldova. I just had quite a nice meal in the restaurant. Wasn't really sure what I'm getting because the cook offered me food and tried to explain what it was. Now, I can't complain that he couldn't speak English after all. He's the linguist. He speaks at least 3 fluently. He spoke Romanian, which is one of the languages of Moldova, Russian and Ukrainian, which is all very reasonable for someone who's working on the train that goes from Moscow through Ukraine to Moldova. So I can't really complain that he doesn't speak English. But anyway, what turned up was a really nice soup and a broiled chicken that went down really well. And these are the things that happen when you travel in a country of a language not your own and rely on the goodwill of people around you. It's Friday afternoon in the middle of the hustling, bustling capital of Transnistria. Trisropol or something, I think it's called. Go on, find Transnistria on the map. I challenge you to do so. Transnistria is a throwback to the old Soviet days, a breakaway region of Moldova, probably the most forgotten country in Europe, where we have statues of Vladimir Ilyich still staring down upon the great majority of people hustling and bustling through Trisopol or whatever it's called. Welcome to Transnistria. So what is there to say about Transnistria? Well, I'm standing here in front of the memorial to the dead in the 1990 to 1992 war. What 1990 to 1992 war, I hear you ask? Good question. When the Soviet Union collapsed and Moldova sought its independence, there is the Dniester River that runs down the eastern side of Moldova, and the little sliver of land between the eastern bank of the Dniester River and the Ukraine is Russian speaking. Everything on the western side of the Dniester River is largely Romanian speaking. So you had the Russian speaking people try to break away and stay part of Russia, even though Russia is a few hundred kilometres that way. Didn't succeed in staying part of Russia, but Russia played its little game by providing weapons to them, and they've created this breakaway region that for the last decade has had a ceasefire in place, or a peace agreement of sorts in place, that doesn't give any recognition as a nation state, but we've had to cross the border, we've had to give our passports, we've had to do all of that sort of stuff. Can't get a visa for a country that doesn't exist. And no one seems to know what the long-term future is going to be. Whether Transnistria will ultimately be brought back in as part of Moldova or ultimately become independent, I don't know. Right now it's not an independent country, doesn't count on my list. But I'm here just in case one day it does. Not quite Andy's Burgers, Andy's Pizzas, branching out from South Melbourne. I'm in Odessa, Ukraine, said to be the hedonistic capital of the Balkans. It might be in summer, but I'm mid-season, so it's not right now. But you do have an enormous amount of wonderful architecture in this place. Beautiful city, founded by Catherine the Great to be a free port and a tax-free port to encourage people to come here, settle and trade. And they did all of that. This is the white meeting hall in Livadia Palace, and at that table, in those chairs, sat Roosevelt, Churchill and Stalin to divide up Europe post-World War II. This is the room in which Stalin and Roosevelt met without Churchill to decide on a common strategic approach towards getting Japan out of the war. And this was the Tsar's main reception study, because Livadia Palace was built by the Tsar. But this was also used by Roosevelt as his bedroom during the Yalta Conference. This is the courtyard of Livadia Palace, and that is where that famous shot of the 3 leaders was photographed. The Livadia Palace was originally built for the Romanovs, and the second story of the building is a museum to the Romanov family and the last Tsars before the Bolshevik revolutions. Bloody beautiful building, really light. I can see why they came here a lot. Ocean just down there, really beautiful. You know, with Ukraine's mixed history, one of the worst things that's happened to them has been the Chernobyl disaster, the world's largest nuclear disaster. 250,000 years of half-life from the plutonium there. The whole place is irradiated. You'd be nuts to visit Chernobyl. So here I am, Chernobyl, Ukraine. Back on April 25th, 1986. The engineers of Chernobyl thought they'd run a bit of an experiment and see what would happen if they cut off the power to the cooling cores, or the cooling system over the nuclear reactor core. And what we saw was the world's largest nuclear disaster. For 15 years though, there was a secret. And the secret for those 15 years was how big the follow-up explosion could have been if the emergency work over a couple of months wasn't successful. Gorbachev has since said that the scientists had estimated that if the bottom level of the concrete had cracked and the hot nuclear material had have hit water, the estimated blast would have been 350 megatons, which would have been enough to wipe out the capital of Belarus, Minsk, some 300 kilometres away, and send enough nuclear fallout to make all of Europe uninhabitable. The sign on the top of the shop here reads Produktu, because this is the village produce store for this, one of the evacuated villages around Chernobyl. Behind me is the children's kindergarten of Chernobyl. Through Pripyat. Pripyat is the village closest to the Chernobyl plant. It was built as a model Soviet town, started in 1970 to house the workers and families at the power plant. 50,000 people lived here. So the town was only 16 years old when the disaster happened. This is a good example here of where nature is fighting back. The building collapsed here on April 10th this year. This is the hospital of Pripyat.
Sometimes people ask if iodine tablets were distributed to the Pripyat dwellers not. Actually, to all of it sure is. Did you take that? Over there.
Yeah. Walking through the amusement park of Pripyat, coming up to the Dodgem cars. One of the great ironies is this park was due to open about a week after the disaster hit. So these Dodgem cars never bumped in anger. And this is the nuclear reactor here in Chernobyl. What you've got over it is the sarcophagus that was built in 1986, immediately after the explosion. It took 3 months to build, and that's keeping everything contained. It's got a life expectancy of 30 years, so add 30 to 1986 and you get 2016. So this is coming up to the end of its life expectancy. But there's a new one being built. How long does it need to last for? Well, the 100 kilos of plutonium inside there has a half-life of 250,000 years. How bad is 100 kilos of plutonium? 1 microgram is enough to kill a person. That's Chernobyl. Just to check that we're not contaminated. Hey, welcome to Belarus. I'm in Minsk, the capital of Belarus. And if there are other parts of Eastern Europe you can go to have a look at beautiful old towns, Minsk isn't one of them. Minsk was almost totally destroyed by the Germans and again by the Russians when taking the city back after the war. So now we've got a whole lot of monolithic designs like this one and the visions of main streets that Stalin had. This is Stalin-esque architecture writ large. Welcome to Minsk, Belarus. You might be tempted to think that the cobblestones and nice little buildings over here are an indication of an old town that exists within Minsk. Truth is, it doesn't. All of this was manufactured after World War II to give some sort of semblance and remembrance of what old Minsk looked like before the war destroyed it. What Minsk does look like is all of this. This here is known as the Island of Tears, because this monument here commemorates all of those from Belarus that died during the Afghan War, 1979 to 1989. There are a lot of those memories, or a lot of those monuments dotted around the former Soviet Union. You know, you've got to hand it to the urban planners of the Stalin era. Beautiful parks and fountains, broad boulevards. Not everything was bad in communism, an awful lot was, but their urban planning seemed to get it right. Not so sure about their architecture, but their urban planning certainly over-planned the infrastructure, the public transport, the roads, and all of that is still very visible here in Belarus.